to resuming debate, and the Honourable Member for Halifax.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I was with some friends, and it was a group of women, some feminists in Halifax, and we were getting together to talk about different issues, and I said, I'm speaking to a bill tomorrow, and if any of you have any feedback or perspectives that you think have been missing in this debate, and everybody knew instantly what bill I was talking about. Rehtaeh Parsons' story has touched us all in Nova Scotia. It has left an indelible mark on all of us as Nova Scotians to know that this woman died by suicide as a result of images spread about her over the internet. And so it's touched us all. It's also ignited a really good and healthy debate in Nova Scotia. Everybody has taken part in this conversation, and we're trying to find solutions. The province actually put together a cyberbullying task force to think about what steps can the province take to prevent this tragedy from happening again. And the debate has been lively, the debate has been solemn, the debate has been very real. People have taken this burden seriously and said, this is something we need to figure out as a community. So I was at this event last night, it wasn't an event, sorry, this gathering of friends last night, and I said, so I have to speak to this bill. And one of the women I was with said to me, well, the problem that you're going to have tomorrow with this speech is that the Conservatives aren't actually interested in issues. They're not interested in issues, they're just interested in advancing their own agenda. And if they happen to find a situation or a case that helps them advance that agenda, then they'll use that opportunity to their advantage. And I really believe that that's what's happening here, Mr. Speaker. There are many reasons why I care about this issue. I care because Rehtaeh Parsons was a member of my community, because she was raped, because she was humiliated, and because she felt that the only option for her, that the only way to end that humiliation was suicide. I care about this bill as a woman, as a public figure who understands the hurtful and humiliating power of the internet, and I care about this bill as a feminist. I care about this bill as a legislator, because Rehtaeh Parsons isn't the only victim. And I want to ensure that we have the legislation in place to prevent cyberbullying. And I want to send a message to Canadians that the distribution of private images without consent won't be tolerated. There are lots of reasons to care about this bill. And I know that I speak for all of my NDP colleagues when I say that we must better protect people of all ages from the distribution of private images without consent. That's without any controversy. And we were all proud to support our colleague, the member from Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, when he tabled his bill. He worked to present a balanced and sensible proposal to deal with this issue. He proposed Bill C-540, a bill that would make it an offence to produce or distribute intimate images of an individual without their consent. We stand in solidarity with the member from Dartmouth-Cole Harbour. Rehtaeh Parsons' parents are his constituents, and this was a commitment that he made to them to figure out how we can actually change the law to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening again. But as I said, as my friend said last night, the Conservatives don't have an interest in this issue. It's an interest in advancing an agenda, because Bill C-13, the bill that we have before us, goes well beyond what we need to do to change legislation to prevent cyberbullying. The scope of this bill is much larger than my colleague from Dartmouth-Cole Harbour's proposal. And do you remember, Mr. Speaker, when we were in this House and former public safety minister? Yes, sorry, I just want to make sure I could say his name. I doubted for a sec. You remember when we were here in this House and former Public Safety Minister Vic Taves stood up in this House and he said, you're either with us or you're with the child pornographers. Well, that was in February 2012, and that was a real pivotal moment for me, my experience as a member of Parliament, because the response from community was swift and strong. Canadians said, nah, not on our watch do you get away with saying stuff like that. I mean, that was February 2012, and that was when government introduced its hyperbolically named Protecting Children from Internet Predators Act. It is a bill that everyone rejected it. We, the NDP, rejected it, privacy advocates rejected it, and the public rejected it. And government was shamed into pulling this bill, never to be heard from again, or so we thought. So here we are, and it's 2 years later, and finally, government has figured out a way. They found their vehicle to get those changes brought in. This is their vehicle. This is their opportunity. They're taking two very tragic events, the deaths of Amanda Todd and Rehtaeh Parsons, and using those events to advance their own agenda. Because, lo and behold, 2 years later, we find the long-forgotten aspects of the Taves bill here in C-13. Only this time it's under the auspice of cyberbullying. Because what does targeting banks' financial data have to do with cyberbullying? What does making changes to the Terrorist Financing Act have to do with young people and the spread of images online without consent? If you're trying to prevent cyberbullying, what in the world do you need? Why in the world do you need to change rules around telemarketing and the theft of communication services? It is a gross misuse of our privilege, the privilege that we have as parliamentarians. It's dishonest, and it's an abuse of trust that Canadians put in us when they cast their ballot. If we were honest about our commitment to preventing cyberbullying, we would pass my NDP colleague's motion. If we were honest about our commitment to prevent bullying, we would have passed the motion put forward by my colleague, member for Chicoutimi-Le to develop a national anti-bullying strategy. If we were honest about our commitment to preventing cyberbullying, we would have split this bill up a long time ago. And I'd like to thank the work of my colleague, the member from Gatineau, who has worked incredibly hard on this bill, giving us advice as members of Parliament, doing the legal analysis, going to committee, and she has tried at every turn to split this bill. Why? Because we agree with parts of it, but not the rest. Wouldn't it be an incredible victory, Mr. Speaker, if we could say, guess what? This piece of legislation passed with unanimous consent. Here we were as parliamentarians united in working to prevent cyberbullying. But instead, we have everything in the kitchen sink thrown into one bill. So of course the NDP has to say no. Of course we have to vote against it. And it's going to be used for political partisan purposes. Thank goodness 10%ers aren't. We can't send 10%ers into other people's ridings anymore, because I know I would have one sent into my riding saying, do you realize that the member for Halifax voted against protecting your children? 2 minutes. Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'm not even... There's a lot to say on this bill. Thank you for the time warning. It's for partisan purposes. We should be splitting the bill. We have tried to split the bill. We also have tried to bring forward amendments. These are not crazy, complicated ideas for fixing this bill. They are simple and elegant. Some of these changes are not deal breakers. It's just changing a word. An example, by raising the standard from reasonable grounds to suspect to reasonable grounds to believe, it's one simple word. We know what the solution is. Change that word from suspect to believe, because there is a world of difference between those two concepts. I'm suspicious all the time. Do I actually believe that things are happening? Probably not. It's a big legal difference. It's an elegant, simple solution. We proposed it after hearing from witnesses at committee, and yet the proposition was voted down. When my colleague, the member from Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, introduced his bill in June 2013, as I said, this was a commitment to his constituents, Glen Canning and Leah Parsons, and he did an interview with Toby Cohen, a journalist here on Parliament Hill, July 22nd, 2013, and he actually said at that time, he said he doesn't care who gets credit as long as it gets done. And he hoped the government would introduce a piece of legislation, because as you know, government legislation passes, it's much more swift, the process. And he said, I'm going to quote from that article, "I hope that they don't try to wrap too many things into one piece of legislation." 2 years ago. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be so cynical as to try and predict that this kind of thing's going to happen, but it's the modus operandi here these days. Oh, okay. Probably just have a minute left. No, you're telling me to wrap up. Perhaps I can address some of my other points when I'm answering questions. But I find this whole act to be very disappointing, and I really wish that we could have worked together on this, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Minister for Canadian Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my member across the way for her speech. However, I was quite surprised at some of the content of the speech, and I would take issue, of course, with the fact that she claims that Conservatives on this side don't care about these issues. Were we not to care about these issues, we wouldn't be putting forward a bill that actually addresses the needs of not only the Parsons and the Todd family, but of police officers who care intimately about solving these kinds of crimes. They do not have the tools required, and it is obvious, just by looking at the makeup of our parties, that having 12 police officers sitting in a Conservative caucus and no police officers sitting in the NDP caucus, that we obviously have some experience in dealing with victims, and we are going to continue to push forward for victims. So my question for that member would be the following, and I'm very hopeful that she will correct the statements made about us not caring about these issues and caring only about agenda. How on earth does she explain the fact that both of these poor young women's families have agreed 100% with this Conservative government's bill, including not only those two families, but Glenn Canning, who is also in committee, agrees 100% with this bill. And again, I hope that the member withdraws those really senseless accusations of us not caring about the issues. These are serious and heartfelt.
Well, member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her question. I know about her history as a police officer. We were both elected at the same time, and we have a friendship across the aisles. And I honor the work that she has done as a police officer. And she's taken some brave positions in this House based on her experience as a police officer. And I applaud her for some of those brave positions. But I cannot agree on this piece. I cannot agree on it at all. When you look at the fact that the Terrorist Financing Act is being changed, what in the world does that have to do with the Amanda Todd or Rehtaeh Parsons situation? Absolutely nothing. Terrorist financing and telemarketing and the theft of telecommunications services? If government could explain to me how this is going to protect a 17-year-old girl who's having pictures of her spread from cell phone to cell phone, maybe I could get there, but they can't explain it. And I would point out that, I mean, I don't want to get into a war of words around what parents said this or that, but I will point out that Amanda Todd's mother has had some pretty profound issues with the privacy violations that are inherent in this piece of legislation, and I wouldn't be so quick to say that the parents are universally in support of this legislation on that point. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Some comments. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did want to pick up when the member makes reference to the scope of the size of the legislation, and if I could just bring it back a little bit in the sense that she makes reference to one of her colleagues and some of the work that he has done. And I think it's important that we recognize that through private members' business, we have seen, whether it's motions or bills, one of the ones that comes across my mind is my colleague, the Liberal Party health critic from Vancouver, and a lot of the work that she did on cyberbullying. We recognize that through the advancement of technology, we have seen all sorts of abuse that has been there, and there is a need. We hear it from our constituents, Mr. Speaker, Canadians from coast to coast to coast, that want to see a progressive legislation brought forward to protect the citizenry. My question to the member is, would she not agree or concur that, that many of the pieces of legislation that were brought forward actually received virtually unanimous support from all members of the House? So it's somewhat disappointing that that goodwill that was there for many pieces of private members' bills or motions seem to have been lost in the development of this particular piece.
Honourable Member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with my colleague about his statement about the impact on goodwill. I mean, there's only so many times you can go in with your hat and say, all right, let's work together on something, and then have the door slammed in your face or have it twisted around somehow. At some point, you stop being willing to work across party lines. I hope we're not there yet. But it gets a bit, we're getting there in some ways. You know, my colleague did bring up a good point about laws do need to change. Absolutely. They're not modern enough. They're not keeping up with the times. I think it's an interesting thing that we are having this debate today when a young man in Halifax just pled guilty to the distribution of child porn images in what the media is calling a very famous child porn case. The media can't identify what that case is. We all know what that case is. It's the case we're talking about today. Media can't identify the victim or the victim because of a publication ban. The parents of this victim say it is better for the public good, for the public to know. We waive the rights of our deceased child because it's for the public good that the public know who we're talking about. So there are these moments where the laws don't make sense, and that's what we do here. We listen to people, we see where they're not making sense, and hopefully we try and make some sense of them, and sometimes that means changing them. Thank you.